Greetings to all Flying Hub members. Welcome to this first podcast themed as you and Captain Khalid, where I will be hosting Flying Hub members and share their activities, experiences, achievements, and probably their future plans. I'm very excited to welcome you all to the first episode. Today we have a special guest. You would know why in a while. Mark Corbett. In this episode, we will get to know more about Mark's experience, achievements throughout his journey. Before we kick off, I would like to remind you and request you to watch the YouTube channel at Flying Hub 104. Don't forget to subscribe. Your comments are really valuable to us. So here we go. Mark, welcome to Flying Hub and thank you for being here.
Captain Khalid, my old friend, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Very well. It's been a long, long time.
True. How are you enjoying the weather now in Australia?
It's not too bad. It's a little bit late at night here and a nice 20 degrees Celsius, but I think tomorrow we've got a top 35, 38 degrees. It's just
All right.
nice, but for Australia, that's hot.
True. Yeah. Well, that's normal where I come from, so that's fine. Okay. While preparing for this episode, I must confess that you have been you have an impressive CV. Although I know you for a long time, but I've actually struggled reading through that CV with all those accomplishments, awards, and memberships, and all the projects that you have been involved in. And I gladly found various things that we have in common, or namely human factors. But let's hear from you about Mark.
Oh, that's a hard one. I know the story. You and I think, first met in the mid-1990s. I can remember walking into a classroom in Doha, and there was a room full of smiling young faces, and one of them was Khalid Al-Hashmi.
You are just revealing a secret now that no one knows. Please continue.
That was probably a third of the way into my aviation journey. I grew up in aviation and ended up in our Australian Air Force myself for a number of years in a variety of careers. I was a civil pilot, a military air traffic controller, and a military navigator. But unfortunately, I lost my flight crew medical, so branched out into other things. And that's when I ended up in the training organisations. And that's where we met in Doha. I was there for a few years, then was lucky enough to get the opportunity to join Qatar's Department of Civil Aviation and Meteorology, as it was then, now QCAA.
QCAA.
And I was given a rare opportunity in aviation these days to write rules from scratch.
Wow.
So I had the opportunity to write all the flight crew licensing rules or draft them for the country at that stage. And from there, I went to a university in the US where I continued on that training journey. And then I'd gone a long way down that human factors pathway that you mentioned. And then for the next 22 years, I was the human factors researcher at our Australian Air Force Institute of Aviation Medicine. So looking at how to optimize the human in the system. And that's what focus has been for a long time, is how to improve and get the most out of the human that's working in the aviation system. It's what I love. Great fun.
Wow. Quite a journey, Mark. And now I want you to tell us, how did we meet?
I've already told you that, haven't I?
No, I mean, not the first one. How did we, stumble on each other again after all this year?
LinkedIn is a wonderful network. It's like Facebook for professionals. And
Absolutely.
it was during one of those posts I chanced upon one of the other names in the list, and there was your name, and it jumped out at me straight away because I remembered that young smiling face in Doha all those years ago. So I knew immediately who it was, and
Well,
that's
you know
where.
what? Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Yeah, to be honest, I was when you DM'd me, I looked at your profile picture, profile, and then I wanted to recognize the picture, and I said, well, who is this guy? I know the name, but the picture is not actually clear because it's a sketch, and uh, and then when you said, okay, do we know each other or something? Have we met before? Have you been to Doha? This is where actually it clicked. Now I got shocked and I said, "Wow, it's really a small world."
It is.
And I'm very glad to see my teacher, who has been teaching me back in the days, as you said, in mid '95, I think, mid '90s, teaching us navigation and performance alpha. So I would like to thank you for all your hard work with all of us, all my batch and all the guys and at that time in the college. Um, Without you and your colleagues, we wouldn't have been here, flying now in different parts of the world, flying passengers around the world, and living actually our dreams. So thank you, Mark, uh, for those days.
I would thank you actually, and the rest of your class for being prepared to undertake the work. And that was, for me, the reward. And I think I relayed to you the story, and it was thanks to your class that I ended up being quizzed quite seriously by
Really?
the rector at that stage, because when you did Performance Alpha, that was the first time that anybody had ever seen a whole course all past Performance Alpha on the first attempt,
Yeah.
because we all worked together
Yeah.
to work the way through it using whatever means necessary to get the messages across so that you could successfully pass. And that, to me, that was the greatest reward, that somebody thought that I'd done something nefarious to get you all through where I hadn't.
Okay. So we thank each other now. Can we do some business?
It's a bit
Okay.
embarrassing.
No, it's okay. Throughout your rich journey, as we discussed, you have been engaged in various dimensions in aviation. Um, Allow me to ask you one question from each dimension. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, not a problem at all.
Very good. Okay. Uh, Almost all industries are facing certain challenges. Uh, they could be external or internal, self-induced. Aviation is actually no difference. Uh, with regard to the pilot workforce, uh, since this topic is actually a trending one, what could be the cause of such challenges, you think?
I think there's a couple of things that come to play in that. I remember in about 2018, 2019, Boeing and Airbus were both putting out papers at the time talking about projected workforce requirements for the pilot workforce.
Okay.
And it was already seen then that there were going to be some challenges ahead of the industry. Step forward to March, April 2020 when the pandemic struck.
Yeah.
And I think what has transpired is a combination of the two. With the pandemic, a lot of training got shut down as well in many places around the world because people sitting too closely to each other, they could infect each other, and people were quite worried about that. So training was minimised. Then some people left the industry, and over the last, I'd say 18 months, almost 2 years now, the industry has been picking up in momentum again. I saw a report recently, we're almost back at, in some areas even higher, back up to pre-pandemic levels in demand for air travel. But We haven't had the throughput of student pilots in that time. So I think there is a huge challenge ahead with all the demand for pilot time in the cockpit and the demand from the public to get
Yes.
more travel. How is that met? That's where we start to look at things like with a reduced workforce and increased flying rates, how do we manage fatigue and other issues like that as well as what do we do about the training throughput and improving the training continuum. And I saw yesterday an article on LinkedIn referring to a professor at Embry-Riddle University in the US, where she is undertaking research looking at slightly different training paradigms. And we've seen the US Air Force and some other nations as well, the UK, Australia, looking at different ways to train future aviators and reduce the costs, increase the not just the numbers in, but the likely success rate of candidates as well through to the cockpit. So I think there are a number of dimensions there that challenge the industry.
Yeah. Okay. So do you see, or in fact, I don't want to have it as a closed question. I would say, how do you see technology utilization or technology intervention in overcoming those challenges? How can it help?
I think it still has more that it can offer to help the human. We've seen that from the early days of aviation. If you looked at the flight deck immediately post World War II, it was a 5 to 6 person flight deck. Pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, radio operator,
Sure.
navigator, variety of roles. So as technology has improved, the demand for workload, the number of people on the flight deck has diminished. As soon as you take one out, though, the workload for the others increases.
Sure.
But we're now at that point where using augmented reality, using artificial intelligence and autonomous systems to provide in-cockpit assistance to the aviator, I think there are some great opportunities. And we've already seen the push in some areas to go to large aircraft with a single pilot flight deck, which creates another challenge.
True. Yeah. That subject by itself is initially it's a controversial one because it's just. I'm sure there were calls long time ago, but it was not the real time, or let's say the right moment to explore it. But now, as you said, with this AI and augmented reality, and I think the subject worth discovering.
And I've also seen public demand push airlines and the industry to see what else can be done. If you look at Qantas with their Project Sunrise, where they currently fly from Perth direct to London as a single sector. Later this year, they'll be doing Sydney direct to New York as a single sector, and they're looking at Sydney to London as a single sector, where that used to be a 2 to 3 step.
Yeah. How many hours is it?
Flight time around the 18-hour mark, 18 to 19. Airborne.
But the regulations are there now to do such a long sector when you have augmentation, right?
Correct. Absolutely there. If we've got enough, I think the challenge is still there. How many pilots do we have available to do that? What level of augmentation is acceptable? I think there are still a lot of questions there for us to ask and answer.
Yes, I promise you, I will have another podcast for SPO with maybe other speakers who have experience in this from different parts of the world, because I know this topic is actually also controversial so far, and it's been touched in the US, Europe as well as Australia. It's worth actually discussing it, though I don't agree just stating my mind.
But
But
there was an article in the public domain about 2 years ago where the US Air Force had trialled it with their KC-46 tanker. So that's a Boeing 767 sized aircraft, and they were doing trials of single pilot ops.
yeah, so it's good to try it. Yeah. Well,
Is the public
I
ready
think
for it?
we will touch on this because this deserves actually a separate episode about it with other speakers. I would love actually to touch this with you as well as others. We will arrange it, I promise, one day. Can I move on to the second question? Thank you for answering that. That's it. Yeah. Okay. As I said, we have something in common: human factors. I do love CRM a lot. Course management. I enjoyed actually teaching it for you. Also have been strongly involved in projects related to human factors. Now, let me share with you a story. Beginning of 2023, in January, I was undergoing a course for integrated safety management system. And the lecturer has used one of the videos while I was writing some notes, and I heard this voice. This voice sounded really familiar, and I looked up to the projector, and I saw Mark Corbett. Who's this? I know this name. Who is this guy? What is he talking about? And in fact, it was one of your interviews about human factors in, I think, Australian Defence Force, ADF. And after the video, during the break, I went to the instructor and I told him, can I have a copy of that video? And he said, okay, I will give it to you once we finish. What interests you in that video? And I told him, my instructor back in school, he was there. And he goes, what? How small is aviation industry? So you were actually, during that video, you were talking about human factors. So since CRM is part of the non-technical skills in aviation, and you've been engaged into it, can you share with us your experience and overview about CRM, and does it still have issues?
I think it will always have issues to deal with because it's a part of the human condition. If we all thought and acted exactly the same way, it would be a very dull and boring world to be in.
Oh.
So I think so long as we are working together, we will always have those moments where we may disagree, we may have different personalities, different perspectives that can cause irritations, cause issues on the flight deck. So I think there will always be a case. And I've seen it many times over the years as you get an organisation, a company, a flying unit, and they get very passionate about CRM or non-technical skills. And it's usually because they've had an event. And I've seen it so many times that they'll fix it, they'll move on. And about 5 years later, another one will come along. You see these people come through the system.
Yeah.
And I can remember my own personal experience with one that these days we would call a rogue aviator, a person that was very, very skilled, but could not work all the time with a large crew, and there would be conflicts going on. And when I relayed that story back to some people I was working with a number of years ago, they said, yes, and we had another one like that.
Wow.
And then about 5 years later, they had another one like that.
Mm.
So yes, CRM is important, but I think it comes in waves and cycles. And I'll put my hand on my heart and say I almost became quite blasé and laissez-faire. Some of the terms that get used a lot in CRM.
Laissez-faire.
About the value that CRM had. And I was doing some training for an organisation where we were introducing CRM-style training into a cardiothoracic unit in a hospital. And it wasn't until I was talking to that group and we were going through all the standard modules that you do that I saw the sparks light in their eyes, and I thought, they've seen it before or heard of it before, and it gave them the spark, and they made huge changes to the way their unit operated. That I found really rewarding.
Sure.
But when I started to talk to them and others about it, in CRM or NTS, we have what varies depending upon the training paradigm between 10 and 15 basic modules, and it tends to go in a bit of a loop around itself. But I learnt that the one greatest module, the premier module that has the greatest impact, is the one on communication.
Yeah.
Because if we get that right, all of the rest goes away.
Yeah, it's just like the saying when they introduced these non-technical skills back in the days in Professor James Reason, and the way communication was explained within the Notics matrix is that the communication was not actually part of the categories because it's the lubricant between all the rest of the categories. Yeah.
Absolutely it is. And if you've got good communication, then all the other problems really disappear.
So, yeah. I think that's not only in aviation, I think it's just in life as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we see it on the geopolitical stage at the moment too. It's all parts of society. If they don't talk to each other, they don't get on and problems start.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. I know it's getting maybe late in your time. I have one last point. Please, if you don't mind. Okay. I normally try to avoid discussing things about fatigue and risk management. I can't have these three words next to each other because it's really so controversial. And being a pilot, like a lot of my peers, we tend to complain a lot about fatigue and is it? I think it's just maybe the way I feel about it. It's not integrated well in documentation or manuals, or maybe it's not introduced well in training, or maybe I got lost in between. But it's the ambiguous fact that that's how I call it. It's an ambiguous fact, at least for me. So can you help us out, please? Looking for answers of the unasked questions about FRMS.
If you go back to the ideals of it that were put into the ICAO, what was it, .9966 back in 2012 when the first edition of it was released, it had a very altruistic model of fatigue risk management systems. And I think, sadly, in a lot of domains, for a variety of very good reasons, whether it was because of a cultural context that they were trying to incorporate it within the culture of an organisation, or whether it was the willingness to share information between aircrew and management, or a whole variety of reasons, I don't think we ever got to that pure sense of FRMS. But I think what has been coming about over the last 7 years or so is the sharing of the learning to share information and making changes that are evidence-based. So to have it evidence-based, you've got to collect the data and show the reason that it does or doesn't work. And that's an interesting one. But The underlying question, because for a number of years, for 10 or 15 years now, I've been working with various objective detection systems to look at the fatigue level of aviators. And then I've been considering what you can do in the next step. So if you find that an aviator's drowsy, what can you do about it? What mitigation strategy can you employ? But one of the fundamental questions that challenges a lot of researchers, academics, and industry is, what is an acceptable level of fatigue for aviation?
That's an interesting question. Say that again.
What is an acceptable level of fatigue for various operations in the aviation domain? And the reason I mention that is I was in one piece of research, I was collecting objective data from line pilots flying with an operator who shall remain nameless. And I was using a detection system called OptAlert that came from the motor transport and mining industries, is what it was originally designed for. And in the motor transport industry, using this scale that they have with the product, 4.5 was considered, oh, you're getting a bit unsafe. 5, you should pull over now and stop driving. And what I found was, with the data I collected, and they were night freight operations in one data set, is that approximately 10% of the time, people were above that 4.5 too drowsy level. And for approximately 4% of the time, they were above a level considered unsafe to drive a car.
4% only.
Sorry?
4% only above the acceptable level.
4% of their time was spent at a drowsiness level above what was considered acceptable driving a car. So it made me start to think about the question then of, is that a problem or not? And I think a lot of it is very contextually dependent. So 4%, 10% might not be too bad if you're at flight level 370 transiting over the middle of an ocean, where if everybody's asleep, then the attitude of the aircraft changes. There's going to be slipstream noise. There's going to be a lot of other warnings and alerts go off, and a lot of other noise to arouse the pilot. So is that a problem? Whereas that same level of drowsiness, if you're flying on night vision goggles doing an emergency recovery flight for an aeromedical retrieval team, that could be fatal. Yeah. So I'm starting to wonder about what is too fatigued, and looking at how we can better characterise that, and then what we can do to manage or mitigate the threat that that fatigue level poses to safe flight. Does that answer your question? Or does it ask a lot more?
I think I'm starting to losing you.
So did that answer your question, or does it really?
It did actually, and it went into details that I might still don't grasp very well, because you are actually basing it on. But I have a question on that. Those data that you were collected, now we call them objective data. They were not subjective, were they?
No. There was no way known the individual could alter the data, because it used the tool uses a variety of ocular measures, looking at eyelids, rate of movement, speed of movement, saccadic eye movements, and that sort of level. It uses infrared signal bounced from a sensor barrel at the eye and eyelids, and collects that data at a rate of 500 hertz, so 500 times a second. And it uses a variety of the data points within the data stream that it collects to determine the drowsiness level. So it's quite objective. You can't
Mm.
Tried, and I can't fool it.
That's very good. We'd love to touch on this on another episode as well, I promise, Mark, because with your wealth of knowledge, we actually need to explore this further. So we will have on our table the FRMS. We will have the yes. I would love actually to. I know you are a busy man and you are busy with researches and stuff. So be generous with us and share with us some of the information. And I'm sure a lot of my colleagues would love to know more about this. I mean, especially about this FRMS and objective data. That's good actually to have and start spreading it around the globe, because it will vary between short or long flights. It will vary between the time of the day, the circadian rhythm, and so forth. So these things matter.
And where I started to get into with some of my fatigue research over the years is not just looking at the flight time.
Mm.
So in Australia, we have an unusual regulatory system in the country now, the Work Health Safety Act, where it's a two-part legal obligation. The employer has to provide you with a work and rest regime that enables you to get the rest you need so you can turn up to work ready to undertake work. But likewise, there is a legal obligation upon the individual to use the rest time to get the rest that they need to do that work. But with that has also come an understanding that the employer's duty of care and responsibility isn't from where you sign on to where you sign off for the sortie, the flight.
Yeah.
They have a duty of care to ensure you get home safely as well.
That's good.
And how many of us, after a long flight, have jumped in their car and raced home in possibly a fatigue state where we shouldn't have got behind the wheel?
Yeah. True.
And so I've looked at some of that data going beyond just the flight, but into the transits to and from. And sometimes in a couple of studies I did, a few days either side of the long duration sortie.
Yeah, that's good, because some companies actually with their flight profiles, they don't make pilots drive home. They actually transport them from to work and vice versa. So maybe this is one way of getting and mitigating this issue.
I did see one company once that had a very mature working relationship between the pilots and the management, and it was predominantly a night sorties that were being flown by this operator.
Mm.
So they set up crew rest facilities at their various hubs. So a room that was acoustically and thermally insulated from the environment, where you could get quiet, dark, cool, comfortable accommodation. And what I saw was that crews were applying their own risk management and saying, you know what, it's 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning. If I get in my car now, it's going to be peak hour traffic, and that's possibly not good. I'm tired. I was amazed at the number of people that used the crew rest facilities to get a good rest before they start their drive home. It was very, very warming to see.
Wise, I would say. Very wise.
Yeah, very, very wise.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Mark, it's been a pleasure. And I would like to thank you for being with us today at Flying Hub. Thank you for your time. Wish you all the best. And we will meet again.
I hope so, Khalid. It's been an absolute joy talking to you.